Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Iter podcast. My name is Emmanuel, if you didn't already know that. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about how to go through grief. So, there's a couple things associated with grief. I think the major one being mental health. There's a lot of examples for grieving, and there's a lot of ways that people deal with it. It's kind of tough, especially when you don't really understand what you're going through. So I'm hoping that what I explain in this podcast, that's gonna be up on Spotify, YouTube. Hopefully this can help you guys go through grief, like different types of loss, so that you guys can better yourselves in the future, especially when you guys are dealing with like the more serious types of grief, and especially if you don't have anyone to kind of help you with these stages. So let's go ahead and get started. So first off, I also want to say that I'm not a professional in this type of thing. I'm kind of just learning also for myself. There's also things that I have to go through, and the main point of this podcast is not only to help you guys, but also to help myself. So I'm also like looking into all these things and just trying to better myself, and in turn help better you guys and set you guys up for the future. And to Cheese Whiz Kid, to answer your first question, what kind of grief am I going through? So I'm actually going through a couple things right now. I'm not saying that I'm like fully through it, but I think one of the biggest things that's really affected me, even though it's been quite some time ago, is the loss of my grandfather. That happened, 2 years ago, or 1 year ago, I believe. Back near the end of COVID, or if COVID is still going. But probably 2 years ago, a year ago, that's probably one of the biggest things that's causing me to grieve right now. And that's another thing that I'm also going to be talking over probably towards the end of this podcast. And I'll probably only be relating to questions about that's relating to this topic. Alright, so examples of things that people grieve over, that could range from a variety of things. People grieve over a lot of things. For example, people could grieve over a loss of a job, or in return, loss of financial security. Also, other things would be like a loss of physical ability, and that kind of goes hand in hand with sports. And that could also go with jobs too, like getting hurt at a job, causing you to either lose your job or unable to do your job properly, so it takes you out for a couple months. Another thing would be like changes in relationships, so breakups, divorce, loss of friendships, relationships with your family members, things like related to that nature. And then I think the biggest one that obviously everybody thinks of when we talk about grieving would probably be the loss of friends and family members. That's a big one. That's one that kind of gets everybody's mental health. Gets them into deep depression, especially if it's people that they were really close to, and it kind of had a big impact on their life. So I'll go ahead and probably explain some of these types of things that people grieve over in the near the end of this episode. But to go through and understand when people are grieving, and for yourself, you have to understand that there's multiple stages of grieving, and it's kind of hard to go through, especially if you don't know what what those stages are and how you can recognize that you're going through these things. It's going to be harder, especially because it's a lot harder for us to look within ourselves and see what we're going through from the outside in. Sometimes you need that other person to help you realize that you're going through one of these stages. So like when I was looking up all this stuff, like on grieving and what are the stages of grieving, like the five main things that I saw were denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And on those 5 stages, you can be in multiple stages at once, but for the not for the most part, but people generally are in at least one of these stages when they're grieving, and kind of can be in a state of acceptance like towards the end, where they're actually getting better and realizing that everything will be all right, especially after the loss of a loved one. But it is possible to go through to be in 2 stages at once. So for example, you could be in denial and anger at the same time, or anger and depression, or bargaining and anger. But it's just a matter of if you can realize what stage you're in, or if you can help somebody realize that they're in a certain stage of depression or a stage of grief to help them get through it. And another thing to also bring up about the 5 stages is also that it doesn't go in order. You could, like, I named them by denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, but you can jump back and forth between stages, but you could also put yourself in a loop to where you don't heal from these stages, and that's kind of something that we want to avoid, so that we don't go into deep depression and kill our mental health in a sense. So I'm going into detail for each of these stages, what like each stage can look like. We'll go ahead and start with denial. So some things of denial that you can kind of recognize when you're in it, or when somebody else is in it, and would be like avoiding. So for example, I'm gonna keep going back to the example of a lost one, like losing a loved one, I should say. So like avoiding talking about how you lost that loved one, how that made you feel, avoiding to deal with everyday things like avoiding work, or avoiding communicating with other loved ones. That's one form of denial that some people tend to miss. Another form would probably be procrastination. So procrastinating to do your homework if you're in school, or procrastinating to do your job at work. And this can also like lead into deeper depression, because when if you're not doing your job at work, you could lose your job, and then you're just kind of like putting more grief on that like first stage of, or that first cause of grief in the first place. So like if you lose a loved one, then you don't do work, you get fired. That's another thing that you have to grieve about, therefore pushing you deeper into your grievance and depression, and in return destroying your mental health. But another thing could also be being easily distracted, kind of just like in the middle of talking to somebody, or somebody's talking to you trying to explain a story, and you just lose your train of thought, or stop talking to everybody. Like you kind of realize that, oh damn, like this person's talking to me and I wasn't paying attention. That can also happen. That's one of the like easier things that you can realize when going through denial. That's something that like you realize, but at the same time I'm pretty sure most people didn't know that was one of the stages. That was a part of the stage of the denial. And another thing would probably be staying busy all the time. This is something that one of the things I have a problem with. I'm just constantly trying to keep myself busy, so that I have probably like less time to think about these different things that I'm grieving about. And that's probably like a big problem, because then if you don't ever talk about it, then you're never gonna get through it. But another thing in denial that you can see with other people and with yourself would probably be like lying to yourself or them lying to themselves, saying that it's fine or they're fine, when in reality you can tell that that person or yourself, like, you're not fine. And that's probably another thing that's gonna like really kill you, because you're not helping yourself get through that. And that's kind of it's a bad thing. Sorry, let me just turn that down. And that's another bad thing, lying to yourself, saying that it's fine and saying that I'm fine, when in reality you're not, and you need somebody to talk to. So for the extreme example too, like, of denial would be forgetting that it happened, or forgetting that, forgetting things in daily life. It's not like common, but it happens, especially with like older people. So when they go through the loss of a loved one, for example, like a spouse that they've been with for maybe 20, 30, 40 years, when they go through that loss, that can cause them to kind of go into, I don't even know how to explain it, but they just really forget that that person is gone, and they kind of deny that that person is gone. For example, like, they're making up excuses, saying like, oh no, so and so isn't gone, he or she went to the store, they're gonna come back, they'll be back soon. And that's like a really rough thing to go through, not only for that person but for those around them, because especially, like, say, I see my grandma grieving, and she's saying, oh no, your grandpa's gonna be here soon, he's just went to the store, he went out to go do something, he went to work, he'll be back soon. That's something that can not only is it hurting my grandmother, but in turn hurting me, because I see her going through this and denying that my grandfather had passed away. I'm not saying that that's the case, but that's like an extreme example of how people can also forget that they lost someone, they lost something. And it's like a big form of it's the most extreme form of denial when we're talking about the stages of grief. Going on to anger, so like how we can recognize anger, like the step of anger is when people become pessimistic. They become more negative with the things around them. For example, like they think that they can't do a task that they used to be able to do as easily just because the person is gone. Or in the realm of sports, when they get hurt, they tend to think like, oh, I'll never get through this injury. I can't get through it. It's too painful. I'm too far back now. I got set back way too far. Things like that. That's what's kind of very, like, being very pessimistic with themselves. Another thing would be like sarcasm. Like, you can, well, not sarcasm jokingly, but sarcasm in a negative sense. So being rude with their sarcasm, or your sarcasm to another person, which you probably won't notice when you're doing it, but another person will be able to tell you like, hey man, like, you're being rude, you're being sarcastic in a mean way. And that kind of relates to being more irritable or being more aggressive or passive aggressive. And that's two other forms of anger that people go through when dealing with loss or when grieving. Another like form would be like less patience, which obviously in return makes people more irritable. So when you're less patient, that's another way you can realize that you're in the stage of anger. I know I kind of go through this too, not all the time, but I do realize like, oh damn, like, I'm more irritable and I'm being more aggressive with other people because I have less patience. Kind of all just go hand in hand with each other. And obviously, like, there goes that the extreme example of going through anger, and it's kind of just forcing yourself, not really forcing yourself, but yeah, forcing yourself unintentionally to use alcohol or drugs or if you already drink and do any drugs already, it kind of like progresses that use, that need for the use of drugs and alcohol. That's another way like you can kind of tell if somebody is dealing with anger or in the stage of anger more aggressively and more extremely. That's something that we kind of want to avoid too. Like you don't want to go through the rabbit hole of trying a drug to make yourself feel better, trying drinking more alcohol to make yourself feel better, because that just keeps pushing you further and further down the rabbit hole. You know, drinking more alcohol, can lead to drunk driving. Drunk driving could lead you to a DUI, to crashes, more loss for not only you, not only for yourself, but also for others around you. And I'm not even talking about just people that you know and love, but also for the people out there in the real world where they're driving and you happen to be drunk while driving, you hit them, you you cause them to grieve in return because of the choices that you ended up making. That's something that we want to avoid. Try not to use alcohol and go to drugs and alcohol use when dealing with grief. That's like one of the worst things, in my opinion, that you can do to go through grief. And let me go ahead and move this real quick. But yeah, so that's one of the worst things, and that's something that happens not only in this stage but in the depression stage as well. But those are like the extreme examples of those stages. And when you go into the bargaining side of the stages, you could like how to recognize the bargaining aspect, which is kind of confusing, but when you really like give deeper thought into it, you kind of understand like why the term bargaining is used. So one thing that I found out was that thinking deeply of past, or of the past, of the future, or future with that person, or overthinking, that's one of the ways you can find out that you're in the bargaining stage. For example, thinking like, oh, when thinking deeply into the future with that person or that item, you're like, oh man, I could have been in the NBA if I didn't tear my ACL, or my son could have grew up with like going out. My son could have been going out with my grandfather, 10 years from now if he was still here. Just putting yourself in another rabbit hole, kind of just pushing yourself into depression, thinking about all the things of what could have been and what was back then, and kind of dwelling on those memories. I'm not saying that thinking about those memories is bad, but dwelling on it too much is kind of what like causes people to grieve a lot longer as well. You kind of have to keep the ball rolling and push yourself through it, which is kind of messed up to say in a sense, but you just gotta keep moving, gotta keep swimming, like Dory said. And another thing would be assuming a worse future without that thing slash person. So in the example of grieving in death, like, pets, people, items, stuff like that. Like that's another thing. Like, oh, my life is gonna be worse without that person, without that thing. That's another way you can tell that you're bargaining. You're in the state of bargaining, and that's obviously also negative, because you're kind of just focusing on the worst aspect of your life, when in reality there's so much more that you can live up to. Now, going on to the next wave, you can recognize bargaining would be perfection, being a perfectionist, which in return is like negative but not so negative, depending on the way that you view it. But in this aspect, it goes both ways. So either focusing on your insecurities too much to where it kind of negatively impacts you, where you're always trying to achieve the perfect version of you, or also thinking that you are perfect, and being a perfectionist is what keeps you going and makes you what you are right now. Kind of like that's kind of a rough way to explain it, but it's easier when I explain it to you in one of the examples that I have for you guys earlier. And then another version of bargaining would probably be or would be dwelling on what you could have done differently. So I should have done, I shouldn't have went and did this move during this play. That's in the sports world. When a person gets injured and they think about that time that they got hurt, they think like, oh, I shouldn't have done this move. I shouldn't have done that, because if I didn't do that, this wouldn't have happened. I wouldn't have torn my ACL. I wouldn't have broken my arm. That's like the easiest way I can explain to you guys that you're kind of just dwelling on what happened and how you could have done it differently, when in reality the situation already happened and you can't really do anything about it, which sucks obviously, but you, like I said, you just got to keep the ball rolling. And going on to depression, the way you can recognize depression, which is pretty obvious to most people, I'm gonna say the majority of people can recognize it, but it's still a tough one to get out of. Like the obvious ones would be change in appetite, change in sleep, change in sleep patterns, reduced energy, reduced interest in social outings, reduced motivation. Another obvious one would be crying, which is, in my opinion, one of the good ways to go through depression, because you're kind of just letting it all out, but at the same time, you can't just let yourself cry all the time. And honestly, crying is overlooked from what I see in this, in our world or in our country, which is kind of sad, because it's important for women, but also men to cry. Like we as men can't shy away from crying and think that, oh, it's not manly to cry, and you got to keep everything inside. And I know I go through that a lot, to where it's hard for me to cry in front of people unless I'm really close to you, and sometimes that kind of sucks, because you don't always have that person that's that you can be comfortable with to cry with. And I know a lot of people don't have that, but we just gotta get better as a whole to help people get through those dark times and be their shoulder to cry on. And also, like I explained earlier, the extreme example for that, for depression, to kind of like look out for, would be obviously an increase or new use of alcohol and drugs. We already explained that that's negative. We don't want to do that. That's probably the worst thing that you can do for this, to kind of go through these stages and get out of the darker stages of this grieving. And so here we end up in acceptance. Acceptance would be, being more present with yourself, and being more in the present, just realizing that I'm here today. What can I do to kind of better myself and be the best I can for that person, or for after that thing that happened. You could also be more prideful, or people become more prideful in what they do, and they start accepting life for the ups and downs, and kind of just, like I said, live in the present moment. It's one of the things that we really want to be. Like, that's how you're supposed to deal with, or how you want to end up dealing with grief. It's kind of the stage where you want to further yourself and better yourself, and make sure that you're not affecting others while you're in these stages. Another thing would be like, how you're in the stage of acceptance is when you are able to communicate with people about this loss, and you can be honest with not only yourself but with others when going through it and talking about these subjects. For example, going back to the ACL tear, like the sports injuries, being able to accept that, yeah, it happened, and yeah, what I did during my stage of grief was idiotic, but I'm gonna go ahead and go through this and grow and learn from the mistakes that I made from it. And going on from these the 5 stages, the 5 steps, whatever you want to call it, you just you need to help each other. You guys should be able to not only help yourself but help others kind of learn these stages and go through them as quickly as possible and get into the stage of acceptance a lot sooner. And yeah, not everybody's the same. Everybody goes through stages of the stages of grief differently. It takes some people days, weeks, months, and there's others that take years, decades to grieve through it. And it's kind of the way of life. And hopefully we can kind of push people away from the decades aspect of going through the stages of grief, because that's in my opinion a long time. Some people do need it, but you kind of want to help people get out of those stages as fast as possible and try to keep them away from the cycle of grievance, and try to keep them in that acceptance aspect of these stages. Going into example of lost. So I'm gonna give you a couple examples. The heck is that? Oh, sorry about that. I thought I heard something. But anyways, so some examples that I saw and that I see in reality most of the time that relate to grief, and how you can kind of see like in a real world example would be like, let's talk about the realm of sports again. So when somebody gets injured, so for example, say you get a traumatic injury. I'm gonna go to basketball because that's the best thing I know. So in basketball, say you're playing, you tear your ACL. That kind of ties back into loss of physical ability. And what happens when you tear your ACL, obviously, is you can't run, you can't jump. Sometimes you can't walk, depending on the person and how the extent of the injury. And people tend to, at the moment, go into denial and say like, no, I'm not really hurt. I can't believe this is happening. Like they can't believe that that's what happened in that moment. They kind of think, hey, no, I'm not hurt. I still can walk. I can still do this. I can do that. But then once that adrenaline kind of clears out, that's when they realize like this pain is unbearable, and they kind of go through that step of denial a lot faster than like the other forms of loss. And when they jump into the anger state, is usually, we'll say, about a couple months, maybe a month or a week after the initial injury, when they're in the hospital and getting work done on it. They can go through anger by lashing out at somebody or being upset because of the way that it happened, and they're thinking about it. But going back to the lashing part would be like, they lash out when somebody is trying to help them, saying like, oh, well, come on, you need to get up, you need to walk around after the surgery. And they lash out and they are upset because that person is trying to help them, and in reality they're not upset because of that. They're just upset because of the situation that they've got put into, whether it was their fault or not. And going like, when in the bargaining stage, when it relates to the ACL tear, people can tend to think, like the example that I said earlier, you guys can think that, oh, I should have done something differently at the time. I should have done this move instead of that move. I shouldn't have drove. I shouldn't have landed this way. Whatever caused that initial tear is what they will be thinking about when they're in the bargaining stage, and say like, what could I have done differently at that time, when in reality they kind of shouldn't be doing that and pushing themselves away from that and thinking like, okay, well, it happened, what can I do to progress and get myself better and avoid that situation as a whole once I get back. But because they're unable, some people don't even go to that stage luckily, and then they kind of just jump into depression, or they skip over it and keep going back and forth between denial and anger. And when they say they jump into the stage of depression, they think I can't come back from this, or you start thinking I can't come back from this, or you don't have the motivation to try to heal properly and come back from the injury. You're not trying to recover properly, or you're not sleeping as well because of all the things that are rushing through your head, and how things aren't going to be the same because you went through this injury, or you it's too hard. You think it's too hard for you to go through the injury and go through the healing process. And you're never going to make it. That's what you're kind of telling yourself in this stage of depression. But as you're working and you're moving into the stage of acceptance, that's when most athletes that go through a traumatic injury realize that it happened, and that's okay. But what can we do to change that, and how can we turn to the point before the injury happened? How can I adapt and make myself better and improve my strength, not only physically but also mentally, and to where if this does ever happen again, how can I fix this, and how can I make my recovery process a lot faster and go back into growing in my given sport. And in this case it would be basketball. But another thing would also be like if they're in the state, or if you guys are in the state of acceptance, then also treating yourself with compassion, being more self-compassionate, like not being so hard on yourself, saying like, oh well, my dumb self decided to dwell on this for too long, and I could have recovered 3 months ago, but because I was in depression, I was so hard on myself and I couldn't do it. I thought I couldn't do it, and it took me 9 months instead of 6 months. Like, that's where you need to be more have more self-compassion for yourself and say like, look, yeah, I could have been done 3 months ago, but it took me 9 months. At least I got here. At least I got better. At least I ended up at the point where I'm at, and I'm okay with that. Just for the next time, now I know that I need to try to get through these stages as fast as possible and be able to heal myself properly and get to the point where I want to be as soon as possible. And that's some kind of something that we want to aim to in everything that we lost for. And like, say in the realm of everyday life and people's relationships, when people go through loss in relationships, like, say, for example, let's say a divorce. When people go through divorce, that's especially with a long-time lover, that's tough on people's mental health. No matter which way, like how the divorce happened, whether that be negatively or a good breakup, which honestly most of the time it's not a good breakup. You could end up breaking up on good terms, but it still kind of sucks that you're splitting up with this person that you've been with for a very long time. Kind of just ties into the change of relationships that I was talking about earlier. And people kind of going into denial when they're going through this divorce and saying, no, this isn't happening. But this is just a phase that he's going through or she's going through, and this isn't happening. Or they kind of avoid talking about the subject when it's brought up to them. So say your spouse comes up to you and tells you, hey, or your significant other tells you, hey, we gotta talk. I don't think we should be together anymore. And you kind of brush it off and say, no, you're just going through things. We're just, we had just had an argument, and you're kind of making it making up excuses for what you think is for that person, but in reality it's for yourself, and you're trying to avoid that whole situation just so that you don't have to deal with that grief at the moment. But you're kind of just prolonging that pain and making yourself suffer a lot more, especially when reality hits you hard and you realize, like, damn, this she was serious, or he was serious. He really thought that we shouldn't be together, and it was because of X reason, whatever reason they gave you. And you're kind of just dwelling in that state of denial until it kind of hits you like a truck, and you kind of push yourself into that state of depression a lot longer. And what tends to happen that I see is that people start to get angry, which going into the next stage is they become angry, they become negative, and the idea of love, thinking that this one didn't work out, and I will never love anybody the same. I can't love anyone. Love is a fraud. Love isn't something that is really attainable. Stuff of that nature. And some people, they go to the extreme case of anger, and they turn to or anger or depression, and they turn to drugs and alcohol. And as we said earlier, like, that's not a good, we could all say that that's not a good thing to kind of turn to, especially when going through a loss or grieving through something important in your life. And dealing with that anger it's kind of hard, because sometimes you don't think you're being too negative until you realize that it starts affecting your everyday life. And then you start bargaining, going into the next one, like, you're bargaining, kind of comparing yourself to either your ex-lovers, their new lover, your significant other's new lover, or thinking about what you could have done better to keep that lover, that significant other, or on the opposite hand, saying, that's kind of stupid, I was perfect, why did this person not want me? I was perfect for them. And that kind of goes into bargaining, the perfectionist side of bargaining, where you think you were too perfect and you did nothing wrong, and it was all that person. They were the reason that this happened. It was their fault. They were overthinking. They're like, you start gaslighting, when in reality, it could have been both of you guys. You guys were both the problem. You guys both had some insecurities, or you guys both had issues with trust. Things of that nature, that kind of anything that could have affected your relationship, in a negative aspect. And you kind of just bargaining, or you guys are bargaining with yourselves and thinking that you're perfect, or thinking that you weren't enough at all for that person. And you start comparing yourself, especially if that person ends up with somebody else in the future, say like a year or month, maybe a month, a week from now, 2 weeks from now, 3 years from now. When they're with that next person, you kind of start seeing things, or you become jealous and say, like, oh, well, you kind of jump back into that stage of anger, and you're jealous, and you're like, well, that she was probably talking to him for X amount of time before we were even together. Or you like kind of make excuses because you kind of don't want to go through that grief, and you don't want to go into the next stages, which would be bargaining or depression even. And if you do end up going through depression through a divorce, the best thing, in my opinion, you could do would be cry. Not an extended period of time, but cry. Make yourself, I don't know, if you choose to cry with somebody else or alone, whatever makes you feel better. Like, from my personal self, I'd love to cry in front of somebody that I trust and I feel comfortable with. You know, for me, that might be my brother, my aunt, probably like the two best people in regards to. There's an exception, but I kind of don't want to get into that. So, like my little brother or my aunt are the two people that I can, comfortably go to and cry and not feel ashamed of myself for crying, which unfortunately like people, especially men, end up they feel shame in crying, and it kind of sucks because that's something that we all need so that we can go through these stages of grief. And especially if we want to get like out of depression and into acceptance, or out of anger into acceptance, we need something to kind of push us over that bridge so that we can roll into acceptance. But like another thing when dealing with divorce, you can also have a reduced energy, motivation, reduce interest in social outings, sleep, appetite changes, go into drugs, alcohol, everything that probably like everything that involves depression you can go through when it comes to divorce, just because that's something that requires, or that has a lot of things for a person to think about. Going through divorce can, especially if it was a bad divorce, like if somebody cheated on you, or like something along that nature, or like they really didn't love you, that can kind of push people in a deeper realm of depression. They could start thinking negatively, and kind of like become malnourished because of it, in a sense. Like especially if they reduce their appetite, and like to the extreme example where they're not eating at all for a couple of days. Like that could be applied to all forms of loss too. Like when I lost my grandfather, I kind of saw and heard that my mom was going through this stage of depression, and it kind of sucked because I feel like I couldn't really help her. I could talk to her and do everything I could, but at the end of the day, it was like her choice. I remember she went like a couple of days and she wasn't eating at all, and she was very sad, rightfully so, because that's her father and she really loved him. But it was kind of putting a toll on us, and she was kind of she was placing more grief on her other family members because of it, which was me, my little brother, my little sister. We're all worried because that's our mom. We want to make sure that she's okay, and it's tough, not only for us but the people that we love as well. Like for my kids, when they see me grieving over this and being upset with my own mother because she decided to do what she did at the time, it's just a domino effect of grievance that we want to avoid, so that we don't pass it on to the next person. And going back to the divorce example, when you're like when you're going through that state of depression, you don't want to go into the drugs and the alcohol use aspect of it, because it's only going to make it worse, in my opinion. But you kind of use what crying. That's, like I said, how I see it. Like, you should cry to try to roll yourself into that state of acceptance, and accepting that you're not perfect, and if you made a mistake, it's okay. People, like, you need to be more self-compassionate. Like I said earlier, you need to be compassionate with yourself and tell yourself, like, look, yes, I made that mistake, and what can I do to grow from it? So say you were abusive, not physically, but abusive mentally, and you end up realizing, like, yeah, what I did was I was wrong, even though you didn't realize at the time that you were being abusive mentally. You were wrong, and you accepted the fact that you were, and you're kind of like looking within yourself, or going to counseling to see how you can fix that. And you're okay with that. So you're accepting that something is wrong with you and you're not perfect, but it's only okay because you're still trying to grow. The only time that it's not okay is you realize it and you continue to do that thing that caused you to go through this loss, through this divorce. You continue to gaslight, you continue to be rude to your future partners. So you have a new girlfriend or new boyfriend, and you do the same exact things that you did that caused the last divorce or breakup. That's kind of when you're not really in acceptance. You're kind of just in a sense in a state of denial, which kind of just you know keeps you jumping back and forth between the relationships. And it's another thing you want to avoid, especially when you have children, because you don't want your children to grow up and see that and think that it's okay for you to jump between people, and that having multiple lovers is an okay thing. Like, you kind of want to show them that being with somebody that loves you for you and is there to support you through everything is the life that you kind of want. That no, that not that you kind of want, that you want, and what you want everybody to have. You want everybody to be happy and have that. You want your children and their children to grow up with a mother and a father in a household and not affect them, negatively in the way where you have split households and you're always arguing with the mother of your child or the father of your child, and they grow up and they see all that. They see all the negativity coming from that, and that's something that we want to avoid, especially when it comes to like divorces and relationships, the loss of a relationship. That's something we for sure want to make sure that we embed our kids with, and let them know, hey, yeah, even if you do end up having a child with somebody and God forbid you guys end up not staying together, you let your kids know that, look, me and your mother or your father, we're not together, but we're still there for you. We want you to grow still. We still want you to be the best that you can, and we're gonna be here to support you together. Like, you got to be able to co-parent properly, and that's something I'm not sure if you guys even know this, but that's something that I go through. Unfortunately, I'm not with the mother of my children, and I regret. I have regrets about it, but I'm trying my best to be cordial with them, to co-parent with them. One is one is easier to co-parent with, but obviously you're always gonna have the issues with that person, because you always had that you have that relationship with them, and you always want to show them as much love as you can, even though you guys aren't together. And you should let your partner know, your future partners know, that that's a thing that you kind of have, like, I guess not baggage in a sense, but that's something that you have, that you want to let them know, like, hey, yeah, me and you are going to be together, but I have things that are a priority, a higher priority than you are, my children, and then making sure that the mother of my children are taken care of, because if not, then that also affects for me, my kids. If they see that my mom's struggling, and or their mother is struggling, and I'm able to help them and I choose not to, that kind of like puts in a sense, like puts in their mind that, oh, well, my dad doesn't care about my mom, so why should I care about the woman that I care about? Kind of like pushing the negativity into their mind, which is negative. It's a bad thing to do, obviously. But let's just roll into the next example that I have for when grieving. This one's a tough one for me to talk about, mainly because this is very personal. This is the one that I was talking about earlier in the video, in the stream, for those watching live. And this one would be in the realm of tragedy. So for me, the death of a loved one, which would be my grandfather, ties into the loss of a loved one. the one of the topics that we talked about earlier that people can grieve to. And for me, when my grandfather passed away, I was actually there when it happened, and I was there with my mother. Obviously, one of the toughest things that that people can go through, traumatizing, depending on the state that the person was in. And for me, it was my grandfather. He was like attached to like a bunch of tubes and all this hospital equipment to try to keep him alive. And for me, I couldn't believe that he was in that situation when I was there. I was kind of like telling, he was on his deathbed, and I was over here telling him, like, come on, like, you could wake up. Like, I was in like the most extreme denial example that you could think of. That was me telling him, like, you could wake up. You're making excuses. Your fucking daughter's right here, and you can't fucking get up for your daughter. Like, I was just pissed, and like I was in denial. Like, nah, you're not dying on me right now. Like, and I, after it happened, I avoided talking about the subject for a very long time. Sometimes I feel like I'm in a state of denial, even now. Sometimes I don't like talking about it just because it's hard to talk about. But I kind of jump back and forth between it. And when I'm in the stage of anger, I kind of just I was more irritated, like, after it happened, and I was more aggressive, especially when playing sports like basketball, because as you guys know, I play basketball, and for those that like saw me during that time playing basketball, I'm sure you guys noticed that I was I was rude, very mean. I didn't really care about what people said or thought about me at the time. I was upset, and even like little things like that my teammates would do, I was very upset with. Like, I would get angry, I would lash out on my teammates. It was so bad. Like, just telling them, like, calling them fucking mean names and saying that they're stupid and like, why do they do this? And I'm kind of just like pissed, and we end up losing because of it. And then I'm mad because we lost. I was just like deep in the negative aspect of anger, and that shit it was just bad. And I don't know how I got through it, but I ended up pushing myself through it and got into the bargaining stage. And and this part was kind of like very hard for me, because I would always think about how life would be if he was still here. And honestly, for the most part, I blame myself for his death. And my the mother of my second child can attest to this. She would see me like, she would ask me all the time, and I appreciate her so much. She'd always tell me, like, it's not your fault. You're not the reason why it happened. And I think even to this day, I blame myself, and because he passed away during COVID, and he was actually, like, quote unquote on the front lines. He was dealing with non-emergency transfer patients. So he had his own business. He was working with patients, like helping people that aren't like non-emergencies. So taking people from their home and to their doctor's visits, to their dialysis visits, stuff like that. And he wanted me to work with him, because at the time I actually came back from Kansas, and I was looking for a job once I came back. And I really was like, I need a job. My grandpa offered it to me, and I was like, yeah, I'm willing to do this job. I need a job, and I love to work with my grandpa. So I remember, like, how serious he was. I went through a training, and I really wanted to do this, and he would tell me that we work pretty much all the time. We work 6, sometimes 7 days a week for 12 plus hours, and we're always we're always doing something, we're always busy, and there's gonna be times where it's gonna be like very hard on you, but we have to make sure we're doing everything properly so we don't get people COVID. And I'm telling him, yeah, like I'm ready, I understand, like I know it's hard, I know I'm gonna deal with a lot of like hard situations where I had to carry people, where I had to help people, where I had to make sure that everybody's safe so that we don't spread COVID. And the day he actually got COVID, and unfortunately led to his death. It was in like this beginning of January. I still remember. So he actually texted me and told me, "Hey, can you make it today? Can you make it this morning?" And at that time, my mom, she had texted me that morning or the day before, and she told me she needed me to be her her interpreter at the dentist. So, because she needed help, my mom's deaf. That's aside the point, but she wanted me to be her interpreter. And I told my grandpa, I can't make it. You're gonna have to be. He was gonna be the one to drive every patient instead of me. And I went to my mom. I didn't hear from my grandpa. After that, he ended up catching COVID that day. Was in the he was hospitalized. He ended up in the hospital. Sorry about that. And ever since that day, like he got pneumonia from it. Got like really bad. Was put on a ventilator. He was, and I blame myself for that, because it's like, damn, I could have, if I wouldn't have gone with my mom and forced my brother to be the interpreter for my mom, he would still be here. I would still be able to see him and talk to him. Like, I would have been the one to get COVID instead of him, and I wouldn't have, I was healthy. I was young. I'm healthy. I take care of myself. And my grandpa, on the other hand, he was older. He didn't eat as well as me. He wasn't as active as me. Like, I would have been fine during that time catching COVID, but instead, he got it, and it led to his demise, unfortunately. And after the day it happened, it was like very hard on myself, and I was trying to be a perfectionist after that day for my grandpa. Like, I was trying to aim for perfection, thinking like, oh, well, I need to get this job, I need to do this differently because that's what my grandpa would have wanted. That's, like, I was just very hard on myself at this time, and I was just in a like extreme state of bargaining, and I was just telling myself like, damn, it's my fault. I should have done this. I could have done this. I need to be this for my grandpa. I should have done that for my grandpa. Like, I was just kind of just going through the state of bargaining and thinking about how life would be with him still here. Like, how he could help me through what I'm going through right now. Like, I still think about it to this day. And put me in an extreme state of depression, honestly. Like, I when I start like to dwell in my thoughts and think about him, like all the good times that we used to have, like, I still cry. Like, I cry a lot about it, and this is kind of why I kind of jump back and forth between denial and all these other stages, because it's hard for me to talk about it without crying. And even now, like, whenever I visit his grave, I cry. It's like hard. It's so hard for me, because I'm like super hard on myself, and I blame myself all the time for what happened to him. I know I shouldn't, but it's just it's just life, and I'm trying to go through these stages and trying to let you guys know, like, we need to trying to teach you guys how to go through these stages of grief. And then, in terms for the like going on to the next stage is acceptance. And honestly, I'm not even sure if I reached this stage when it relates to this topic. But if I want to reach that stage of acceptance, or if I already have, like, I need to be more compassionate with myself and realize that this is not what my grandpa would have wanted me to do, or how he would want me to be. And quite honestly, he might be very proud of me for what I've been able to achieve, and what I'm doing for his grandchildren, and how I'm trying my best to take care of people, of my family, of his daughter, trying to take care of his grandchildren, trying to help his granddaughter, trying to take care of his great grandchildren. It's that's something I still need to work on. And for me, it's been 2 years already, or a year and a half, maybe 2 years. And that's why I'm trying to, like, kind of make a big point on it and let everybody know that everybody grieves differently. So, like, for you, hopefully for all of you guys, it takes a month, 2 months, a year max to grieve in the loss of somebody. But if not, I hope you guys all get that help. And maybe this video, maybe this live stream helps you go through the stages of grief, and helps you realize what step you're in and how you can get out of that. But at least for me, it's been 2 years. I realize, looking through all of this, looking at it, looking up the stages of grief, looking up how to get out of grief, and looking up everything related to this topic, it kind of helped me. And like I said at the beginning of this video, like, this isn't just for me, it's also for you guys. But all these topics that I've been bringing up on my podcast for you guys is also for me. Like, even when I talk to guests, it's I'm kind of trying to pick their brain and see how they think and how they deal with things, so that it could help you guys, but also me in return, and see if maybe I'm thinking of things differently, or in a sense, in a wrong way. But yeah, like, just remember these stages of grief. Try to do your best to not dwell on these on, like, certain aspects of the grief, like depression. Try to stay away from drugs, stay away from alcohol when dealing with depression. Remember that, like, everybody's mental health is important, especially your own. And for the men out there, you are loved, you are cared about. And if you feel like nobody else cares for you, loves for you, is there to be that shoulder to cry on, just know I'm here. I'd love to hear about what you guys are grieving in, and just send me a DM on Instagram, or come into the chat and let me know how you're feeling, and I'll go ahead and I'm happy to to hear what you guys are going through, and I'll try to help you guys, because I know not everybody has that shoulder to lean on. They don't have that person they feel comfortable with, but I want to try to be that person for as much people as I can. And I want you all to know that there's somebody for everybody. And no matter what kind of loss you're going through, whether it's something as extreme as the death of a loved one, or something as simple as losing your phone, just know that I'm here. Everybody else in the chat is here. You have loved ones. You have people that care about you. Even if you don't think that, people care about you, we're here. And we're here to try to help you guys feel better, be better, work better, like just be the best version of yourself. So that's gonna end it here. I appreciate you guys for tuning in and listening to how to go through grief, and actually almost seeing me cry on camera talking about my grandpa. And honestly, that helped me. I was I'm glad I was able to kind of get through that whole conversation, that whole talk about my grandpa without breaking down and crying. So that's another way I could realize, that helped me realize that I'm slowly going into the state of acceptance on that loss, at least. So I appreciate everybody. Episode going out Saturday. For those that are listening, tuned in late, this is going to be up on Spotify and YouTube Saturday. Thank you guys. If you're on YouTube and Spotify, subscribe, like, follow. I appreciate everything. Thank you guys, and goodbye.